Movie Camera Series, China's Nuclear Secrets, Episode 6. Project 596. The Bomb That Shook the World. October 16, 1964. Over the frozen sands of Lop Nur, the sky was gray as ash. A gust of wind swept across the desert, carrying the metallic scent of uranium and dust. In the middle of that wasteland stood a steel tower over 100 meters tall, like the spine of the earth itself. At its peak rested a small metallic sphere, barely larger than a truck, containing the greatest secret in modern Chinese history. That sphere, codenamed 596, was the result of 10 years of struggle, of blood, despair, and unshakable pride. Inside it lay more than 20 kilograms of pure uranium-235, compressed with precision measured in millionths of an inch. One mistake, and all of Lop Nur would turn to ash. Beneath the ground, in a concrete bunker 12 meters deep, the Project 596 command team prepared for the moment that would change history. Each person wore a lead suit and headphones, bent over glowing control panels. The countdown clock displayed a single line. 7 hours 0 minutes and 0 seconds. Begin detonation system check. In the center stood Qian Sancheng, the father of China's atomic bomb. His face was gaunt from years without rest. Beside him, Deng Jiaoshen, the bomb's chief designer, his thick glasses reflecting the red light of the control lamps. No one spoke. Only the whir of fans, the rustle of paper, and the tick of the second hand marked the passing breaths of time. In the back room, a young engineer stood frozen, hands trembling around a cup of tea. He whispered, "If this fails, will we ever get a second chance?" Qian didn't turn around. He answered softly, almost to himself, "In history, no one gives you a second chance." Above ground, the observation teams had retreated 15 kilometers away. Farther still, a small unit of army cameramen set up their 35mm cameras, ready to record the birth of a new era, not knowing if they would survive it. The desert wind was sharp enough to cut skin. A young soldier murmured, "What if it doesn't go off?" The man beside him chuckled faintly. "Then at least we'll still have ground to stand on." The words vanished into the whistling wind. 7 hours 59 minutes and 40 seconds. All systems stable. On the main console, green lights blinked one by one. A chain of life and death. 7 hours 59 minutes and 50 seconds. The countdown voice echoed through the bunker. 10, 9, 8, 7? Someone clenched their fists. Cameras began to roll. Radar screens flickered. 3, 2, 1, detonate. In a thousandth of a second, a second sun rose over the earth. A blinding white light erased everything. The tower, the sand, the sky, even the horizon itself. A massive fireball unfolded like a deadly flower, rising tens of kilometers into the air. The shockwave ripped across the desert, tearing open the ground and leaving behind a crater nearly 400 meters wide. Inside the bunker, steel doors trembled violently. Lights flickered. Someone fell to the floor, covering their ears. Qian Sancheng stood still, eyes fixed on the shaking monitors. After 10 seconds, the signal returned. Pressure peaked, radiation stabilized. Then, on the main display, the final line appeared. Detonation successful, yield 22 kilotons. For a moment, no one moved. Then came the eruption, shouts, laughter, tears echoing through the bunker. Someone cried out, "We did it, China has the atomic bomb." In Beijing, at that exact moment, Mao Zedong sat in his private study in Jiangnan. An officer entered, handing him a coded telegram. Mao read slowly, word by word. Project 596, complete. Successful, 7 o'clock. He set the paper down, took a slow drag on his cigarette, and said quietly, "Good, from now on, no one can threaten us with bombs again." Outside, the bells of bicycles rang softly along Chang'an Avenue. No one knew the world had just changed. At Lop Nur, the fireball had faded. Only a colossal mushroom cloud, 12 kilometers high, drifted in the wind. A symbol, a declaration, and a warning. October 16, 1964. China had entered the nuclear age. And the world turned its eyes toward Lop Nur. The place where mankind had lit a new sun. Glowed the shockwaves around the world. As the fireball bloomed above Xinjiang, it tore through the silence of the Cold War. Across the globe, American and Soviet radar stations picked up the signal simultaneously. The blast measured 22 kilotons, the same as Little Boy over Hiroshima. Origin: East Asia, coordinates 40 degrees north, 90 degrees east. There was only one possible source. And no one believed it would come so soon. In the White House Situation Room, President Lyndon B. Johnson received the first report. Mr. President, China has successfully tested an atomic bomb. The room fell silent. One advisor broke in. Impossible. They lost Soviet support in 1960. They shouldn't have uranium enrichment tech. Johnson tapped his finger on the map of China. And yet, they did it. Looks like we've got another nuclear power on the board. Another whispered. Asia will never sleep again. The next morning, the New York Times headline read, China joins the nuclear club. In Moscow, Pravda reported coldly. The People's Republic of China has conducted its first nuclear test. No congratulations, no comment. Just a period, heavy as a stone between two former allies. In Tokyo, civil defense sirens wailed. Panic spread. Is this another Hiroshima? Children were evacuated to shelters. The fear of nuclear fire returned, colder than ever. But in China, the mood was different. There were no parades, no fireworks. Only quiet pride. At Peking University, a student read the People's Daily aloud. They said we were poor and backward. But now, we have the bomb. In a village along the Yellow River, people heard the radio broadcast. Our nation's nuclear test has succeeded. They didn't know what nuclear meant. Only that China had done the impossible. Atoms symboled the people in the shadows. When the mushroom cloud cleared, engineers returned to the site. They moved carefully through the scorched ground. Faces covered, Geiger counters crackling. Gamma levels rising fast. We shouldn't stay long. Deng Jiaoshen nodded, still staring at the crater. We need soil samples. Only then will we know if it truly worked. They worked like men touching the divine, terrified, yet mesmerized. Qian Sancheng looked into the abyss and whispered. We've proven that human intellect knows no limits. But remember, nuclear power is the boundary between light and darkness. In Beijing, Mao, Zhou Enlai, and Yi Jianying gathered over a map. Mao spoke slowly. We have the bomb, but to be truly strong, we must have the hydrogen bomb, the weapon of superpowers. Zhou hesitated. Chairman, we've sacrificed too much, people. Money, faith. Can the people endure more? Mao exhaled smoke like fog. The people suffer today for the sake of their descendants. Without strength, their children will suffer forever. October 16, 1964, was not just the birth of a bomb. It was the day the world realized the unipolar age was over. The sleeping dragon had awakened. And this time, it carried real fire. Test tube the hidden cost. Deep underground, tunnels lined with lead. No windows, no sunlight, only yellow lamps and the constant hum of fans. Scientists worked 16 hours a day. They had no names, only codes. Engineer 104. Physicist 22. Every letter home was censored. Every document sealed. One young engineer wrote in his diary, found years later. I don't know what day it is anymore. I only know that when I look up from the microscope, it's already midnight. And the world outside is no longer ours. In the isotope lab, the stench of acid and radiation dust filled the air. Some went gray-haired in months. Others lost teeth and skin, still smiling. It's fine, as long as the bomb works. A female engineer, Liang Chaoyun, was once asked why she volunteered for Lop Nur. She answered simply, if I don't go, who will? She died in 1966. Her file read, bone marrow failure due to exposure. No mention of radiation. Outside, thousands of workers built, dug, hauled. They ate dry bread, drank salt water, labored in 45 degrees Celsius days and sub-zero nights. One recalled later, "We didn't know what we were building. We only knew it mattered to the motherland. That was enough." In the gray moonlight, gaunt figures pulled carts of raw uranium, their eyes glowing faintly like sparks in the desert dark. Beijing's Institute of Nuclear Physics No. 2 struggled for years to enrich uranium. Every Soviet formula failed. Then Mao ordered, "If the Soviets won't give us the formula, find our own." And they did. Deng Xiaoshen's 596 equation was born. A fully independent enrichment method. When he presented the 17-page report, Premier Zhou Enlai held it with trembling hands and said, "This is not just a scientific paper. It is the declaration of the Chinese mind." Yet when the bomb exploded, none of them were seen. No medals, no headlines, no public names. They only heard the radio say, under the leadership of the party and Chairman Mao, "Our first atomic test was a complete success." And the ones who made it happen just smiled quietly and went back to their underground rooms. An old engineer told his comrades, "No one knows our names. But the bomb does. That's enough." Project 596 was more than a nuclear test. It was a declaration to the world. And a tragic ballad for those who lived between glory and oblivion. They, the unrecorded, unnamed builders of a nation, were the invisible foundation lifting China from its ashes. And in the cold desert wind of Lop Nur, people still whisper a phrase whose author no one remembers. Some people do not need light, for they themselves are the torches of history. The earthquake after the light. October 16, 1964. When China's first atomic bomb exploded over the skies of Lop Nur, a geopolitical shockwave rippled across the world. Before that day, only 5 nations possessed nuclear weapons: the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, France, and India, which stood on the threshold. Now, a 6th name, once dismissed as poor, agrarian, and isolated, had entered the Club of Gods. No warning, no announcement at the United Nations. Just one explosion, and the world understood. China had become a nuclear power. In a smoke-filled room at the Pentagon, tension hung in the air like static. General Curtis LeMay, the man who once oversaw simulated nuclear bombings, slammed his fist on the table as he reviewed satellite images. "If they can make one bomb, they can make another." Another advisor whispered, "They did this without Soviet help. That's more terrifying than the bomb itself." The CIA confirmed. Project 596, named after June 1959. When the Soviets withdrew all their nuclear experts from China, meant that China had achieved everything alone, in total isolation, within just 5 years. The report concluded with a single, chilling line. A nation can be isolated, but intelligence cannot be contained. From Washington to London, Tokyo to Moscow, every radio and newspaper repeated 2 words: China bomb. In Paris, President Charles de Gaulle calmly told reporters, "This is a historical reality. The world must learn to live with it." But in Tokyo, where the memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki still haunted the air, thousands marched through the streets holding banners that read, "No more bombs in Asia." In Moscow, Khrushchev, the man who once promised Mao, "We will help you make a bomb in 8 years," now faced a bitter irony. China had done it without him. Soviet advisors called it the greatest scientific and political slap of the century. Amid the soft sound of rain, Mao Zedong stood before a world map. Tiny red dots marked nuclear test sites of the great powers. A new red mark had just been added, deep in the Lop Nur desert. He said slowly to Zhou Enlai, "Now they must listen to us." "But Zhou, this is only the beginning." Zhou was silent for a long moment before murmuring, "The world is condemning us. The US will tighten the embargo." Mao turned, his eyes cold. "We have survived hunger. We do not fear embargoes. The only thing to fear is disrespect." In Beijing, loudspeakers roared across the city. Our nation's nuclear test has been a great success. The motherland has entered the atomic age. People crowded newspaper stands, pasting the People's Daily on walls, passing it from hand to hand. In student dormitories, some wept. We did it, even when the world looked down on us. In faraway villages, peasants who didn't understand what an atomic bomb was simply raised their cups of rice wine. They say our bomb is as strong as thunder. Then we'll sleep soundly, no one will dare invade us again. But within that light of triumph, another storm was forming. The test that shook the world had also placed China in the crosshairs of every superpower. The US expanded its surveillance network from Okinawa to Taiwan. The Soviets immediately launched dual-use technology controls, aiming to block China's path toward the hydrogen bomb. And between those two encircling giants, Mao said a single, chilling line. If they fear we have one bomb, then we shall make 10. The success of Project 596 was not just a nuclear test. It was the birth cry of a new China. A China that would no longer follow behind. And could no longer turn back. But with that power came enormous responsibility, danger, and an irreversible destiny. October 17, 1964. Less than 24 hours after the blast, the UN Security Council convened an emergency meeting in New York. Behind the closed doors of the 38th floor chamber, the great powers sat face to face. And between them, an empty chair, China's. The US presented a resolution calling for tight global control of nuclear technology, especially in Asia. Britain and Japan supported it. The Soviet Union remained silent, but everyone sensed the mix of anger and fear behind that silence. The American delegate said sharply, "We cannot allow a closed, unstable nation to possess a weapon that could destroy the planet." The Soviet representative replied coldly, "It's unfortunate. If we had still been there, they wouldn't have had to take this path." No one said it aloud, but everyone understood. China had done the impossible. Across Asia, protests erupted. No bombs in Asia. No more Hiroshimas. A Japanese student shouted into a microphone in the square, "The atomic bomb once burned my country to ashes. Now China has built another. Who will stop them?" On Tokyo television, military analysts speculated that China was already planning long-range strategic weapons, including ballistic missiles capable of reaching the Pacific. The US reacted instantly. The Kadena Air Base in Okinawa was placed on DEFCON 3 alert. The 7th Fleet moved reconnaissance ships into the South China Sea. An invisible circle began to tighten around China. In Moscow, Khrushchev hurled an intelligence report across the table. "They detonated the bomb on the very desert where we built their first lab." An aide murmured, "Sir, they did it without us. That's what the world respects." Khrushchev growled, "No, that's what humiliates us." The next day, he was forced to resign, ending his rule over the Soviet Union. Many later said that China's nuclear test was the final straw that fractured the Kremlin. In Beijing, Zhou Enlai read the news without emotion. Revolution needs no allies, only faith and intelligence. After the test, global gold prices spiked, and the New York Stock Exchange trembled. The Times of London ran the headline, "China, the challenger to the nuclear order." In Washington, President Lyndon B. Johnson convened the National Security Council, ordering increased military aid to Taiwan and South Vietnam. A classified CIA memo stated, "China's nuclear capability will embolden it to expand revolutionary influence across Asia." The Cold War in the Far East had officially entered a new phase. The age when nuclear fire was no longer the monopoly of two superpowers. At Zhongnanay, the scientists of Department No. 9 were summoned. They wore no uniforms, only faded cotton coats, their hands still dusty from the desert. Mao looked at each of them, then said, "Comrades, you have made our nation stand tall. But never forget, the world is now watching us. From now on, every mistake could be the excuse they need to destroy us." Silence filled the room. Physicist Qian Sancheng bowed slightly. Chairman, we understand. We will begin research on the hydrogen bomb immediately. Mao nodded and pointed to the Taklamakan Desert on the map. There, you will build something that will silence the world once again. The world now looked at China as if at a strange new star. Bright, unpredictable, and terrifying. No one knew that on that very night. Deep beneath the sands of Lop Nur, Chinese scientists were already sketching designs for something even more fearsome than Project 596. They called it, Test No 6 Inches, the first hydrogen bomb. And from that moment, China had chosen a path with no return. After the explosion of October 16, 1964, China was wrapped in the intoxication of victory. Newspapers blazed with headlines. "We have the bomb." Radio announcers trembled with pride. From this day forward, China has shattered the nuclear monopoly of the great powers. But behind those slogans, in the nameless lands of Xinjiang, the people who made that miracle possible still lived among sand, storms, and loneliness longer than history itself. The wind cut like knives. Night temperatures plunged below -20 degrees Celsius. Tattered tents dotted the testing site, no trees. Only the sound of metal clanging and rough breathing in thin air. Engineer Zhou Guangchao, one of the designers of the detonation system, sat by an oil lamp, writing a letter to his wife. "We have succeeded, but I can't tell you where I am. Or what happened, only that I feel 10 years older in a single night." The letter was never sent. It stayed in his pocket for months before the desert wind took it away. Outside the perimeter fence, a group of Kazakh nomads stumbled upon the charred corpse of a camel. Military radiation detectors recorded abnormally high gamma readings. An evacuation order was issued. Every civilian within 50 kilometers was relocated without explanation. Convoys drove through the night, headlights slicing across the white desert like lost ghosts. Meanwhile, in Beijing's research institutes, scientists were told to start a new project immediately. The hydrogen bomb, Project 9.13. They knew what that meant. No rest. No home. No talking. In the canteen of the Institute of Physics, one young engineer whispered, "Isn't it strange? When we succeed, everyone stays silent." His colleagues smiled faintly. Because we all know, yesterday's triumph could be tomorrow's disaster. That atmosphere spread through China's scientific community. Pride mixed with fear. Glory shrouded in responsibility. At a secret meeting of the Defense Committee, Mao was briefed about radiation exposure at Lop Nur. An advisor said, "Chairman, some soldiers may have suffered mild contamination." Mao was silent for a long time. He looked at the map, at the tiny red dot labeled 596, and said quietly, "If we don't have the bomb, we'll be bombed. If we don't act, others will. History does not permit the weak to survive." No one dared reply. His words fell like a knife, cold, undeniable. From then on, Lop Nur became the silent heart of China's nuclear program. A place without spring, only wind, sand, and men who gave their lives in silence. The young engineers didn't know how long they would live. The scientists didn't know whether their work would save their nation, or destroy it. But they kept going. Because after 1964, there was no way back. A whole civilization had stepped into a new era. An era where nuclear power became its shield of survival. And in the cold night of Lop Nur, amid the howling wind, one scientist whispered to another, "We have awakened the monster. Now we must learn to control it." Atoms symboled the silent race. After the first atomic bomb exploded over the desert, the skies of China blazed with light, yet that light faded faster than anyone expected. Just days after the dust had settled, the National Defense Science Commission convened a secret meeting in Beijing. Chairman Mao was not present, but his order echoed clearly through the telegram that arrived. Continue. We need a hydrogen bomb. Not just for defense, but so that the world will never again dare to look down on us. Everyone in the room understood what that meant. A new project, 100 times harder than Project 596, was about to begin. Its code name, Project 9.13. On the tables lay thick stacks of calculations, covered in symbols and equations. Thermonuclear reactions, fusion processes, secondary stage compression. Concepts that only a handful of Chinese physicists at the time could truly comprehend. Yu Min, later known as the father of China's hydrogen bomb, was then only in his early 30s. He quietly filled the blackboard with formulas of temperature and detonation density. Beside him, Qian Sancheng watched the numbers in silence. Finally, Qian asked softly, "Do you think we're capable of this?" Yu Min replied calmly, "I don't know. But if we don't try, we'll never know." And so they began, with paper, chalk, human intellect, and unyielding patience. No more Soviet aid. No more foreign documents. No more experts to consult. All they had were the results from the first test. And a few scraps of data pieced together from old scientific journals. Building an H-bomb required mastery of fusion physics, knowledge of secondary compression materials, parallel detonation methods, and, above all, supercomputers to simulate reactions. China had none, only an old electromechanical IBM machine, a few logarithmic tables, and hundreds of engineers calculating by hand through the night. One engineer recalled, "We called it the human computer era. Each column of numbers, hundreds of digits long, was split among 10 people and summed manually on graph paper. If one calculation went wrong, the entire group started over. They worked underground, under dim light, and often fell asleep on their desks." Out in the field, the military engineers began constructing the second test base, a system of tunnels 40 meters deep, built to withstand an explosion 10 times stronger than the first. The desert burned at 50 degrees Celsius by day, froze below zero at night. No water, no trees, only sand and wind. A soldier later said, "We dug with our hands and shovels. When the wind rose, the sand would bury the site within hours. But no one stopped. We knew the whole world was watching above our heads." When a nation is exhausted, it must often choose between bread and pride. China, at that time, chose both hunger and pride. In 1965, famine still haunted the countryside. Yet resources, materials, and manpower were diverted entirely to the defense research facilities. Some called it madness. To Mao, it was an investment in survival. During a meeting, Zhou Enlai remarked, "A nation may be poor, but it must have fangs. Bombs and satellites, those are our fangs." That sentence would later define the two bombs, one satellite program. Since the 1964 test, there was no turning back. China had touched the power of destruction, and the only path forward was through it. The young scientists, their hair already graying from stress, continued to work over endless sheets of equations. Outside, the Lop Nur winds howled, and the sands shifted endlessly. But beneath the ground, a new bomb was being born. One that would once again silence the world. Inside the Institute of Nuclear Physics in Beijing, the lights never went out. On desks buried under sketches and graphs, numbers sprawled like mazes. Blast temperature, neutron multiplication coefficient, critical mass, fuel density. A single error could erase years of work. Chief theorist Yu Min often worked until dawn. At 3 a.m., he would finally rise from his desk. Eyes bloodshot, chalk broken between his fingers. A young researcher, Zhao Zhongyao, would quietly place a cup of tea beside him. "Professor, you need to rest." Yu Min smiled faintly. "If I rest, the numbers will sleep too. And we can't let them sleep. Not while the whole world stays awake because of us." The first hydrogen bomb design failed. Fusion could not sustain, compression was insufficient. Each failure meant hundreds of calculations redone by hand. An engineer remembered, "When we said computation, we meant holding a pencil, drawing grids, adding numbers by hand." Some went temporarily blind from staring too long. Others fainted from exhaustion. To simulate fusion, they used the Type 104 computer. a mechanical relic running on punched tape. When it jammed, the team waited 8 hours to restart. One night, as the tape got stuck, 20 people sat silently around the machine, listening to the ticking clock. No one spoke, because every lost minute was another year behind the world. Meanwhile, in the desert, the engineering teams built the real bomb. From incomplete blueprints, no one knew if it would detonate properly. Their only order: prepare to explode. Captain Zhou Jikong wrote in his journal, "We built the tower in the wind and sand. Sand got into the circuits, damaging the sensors. With no replacements, we stripped copper from old radios and rewired by hand. When the wind tilted the test tower, they tied it down with cables and sandbags. No proper radiation suits. No masks. Only faith that what they were doing was right." Then came the Cultural Revolution. Scientists were accused of being counter-revolutionaries. Labs were sealed, instruments confiscated. Yu Min, Deng Jiaxin, and others were banned from entering their institutes. But at night, they secretly returned, not to rebel, but to continue calculating. A witness recalled, "I saw them sitting under oil lamps, writing formulas on the backs of newspaper sheets. They weren't allowed paper or machines. But they still calculated, as if science itself was their breath. And stopping meant death." Then came the breakthrough. Yu Min discovered how to use lithium-6 deuteride as a secondary compression layer, a material capable of sustaining fusion at lower temperatures. When the final equation was written, he simply stared at the board. A colleague asked, "Will it work?" Yu Min whispered, "I don't know. But for the first time, it feels close to the truth." The room fell silent. Then someone cried, not out of triumph, but because after 3 long years, they finally had something worth testing. At Lop Nur, the winds howled again. Amidst the sand and steel, a metallic sphere took shape. China's first hydrogen bomb. No one knew if it would work. No one knew if the world would tremble or laugh. But in their hearts, only one thought echoed. We've come this far. There's no turning back. Lop Nur Desert, dawn. June 17, 1967. The air was freezing, thick with dust and metal. On a tower over 100 meters high, a steel sphere was fixed with cables. China's first hydrogen bomb, codenamed Test Number 6, H-Bomb 596E. 15 kilometers away, in a reinforced bunker, scientists, soldiers, and engineers crowded around the controls. On the wall hung a handwritten sign. "If we fail, we begin again." The countdown began. T10, T5, T3, T1, 0 detonate. A flash tore the sky apart. Sand, wind, and earth vanished in an instant. A fireball brighter than the sun roared across the desert. Moments later, the ground quaked violently. A mushroom cloud spiraled upward like a flaming dragon. From over 200 kilometers away, people saw a second sun rise over the dead lands. In the control bunker, silence. Then, eyes turned toward the radiation monitors. Maximum pressure achieved. Fusion sustained. Yield: 3.3 megatons. The last words set the bunker ablaze with cheers. Some wept, some laughed. One engineer collapsed, crying, We actually did it." Yu Min sat down, trembling. He whispered, "No one believed we could do this. But we did. Not for revenge. For freedom." Within hours, the world was stunned. A poor, war-torn Asian country, amid political chaos, had built a hydrogen bomb. Just 2 years after its first atomic test. Western observers called it the China H-bomb miracle. But for the Chinese, it was no miracle. Only blood and tears condensed into light. In Beijing, Mao heard the report. He said quietly, "Good. Now no one will dare look down on China again." As the winds subsided, the desert fell silent once more. The ground was scorched black for miles. The birthplace of China's artificial sun. The test team emerged, carrying a red flag with handwritten words. Dedicated to the motherland. They planted it in the sand. No parade, no anthem. Only the light in their eyes. The light of a nation once forced to kneel. Now standing tall in the desert. June 17, 1967. China officially became the fourth country in the world to possess the hydrogen bomb, after the US, the Soviet Union, and the UK. From broken labs and humble meals of corn gruel, they had created one of the most powerful weapons on Earth. In a scientist's diary, a single line read, "This is not victory. This is our declaration that China will never bow again."